Last topics: postmodernists, bourgeois. The postmodernists, bourgeois liberalism. Postmodernist, bourgeois liberalism on ethnocentrism. A reply to Clifford Geertz. Clifford Geertz was an anthropologist, American anthropologist, that was very he liked to offer to drive the interpretation of cultures in a way very particular, né? And I think that if I remember this topic is when uh, Rorty addresses to the way that Clifford Gates talks about ethnocentrism in a way that uh, the, the ethnocentrism does not deny the way that the society, the prior society, the prime society of the thinker works. Sometimes the anthropologist tends to deny, in a way, his own culture to to impose the interpretation of the other culture. I think something like that, if I remember correctly. If I don't and you know, someone know, please comments, put in the comments so we can learn from my mistakes. Cosmopolitanism without emancipation, a response to Jean-François Lyotard Index of Names. Lyotard was a French thinker that I don't know very much. I just know that he's from the same generation of Michel Foucault, um, and Jacques Lacan, and some others I don't remember now. It's called the 68 generation, generation of thinkers that was like a very much into the disconstruction of the modern, of the modern way of thinking, of the traditional way of thinking from the modern times, something like that. I don't remember very much about. I just know the saying to you the context. So this is those are the contents. Since the publication of his work, Rorty in 79, Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, Richard Rorty has become increasingly known and influential, far beyond the walls of American analytical philosophy, of which he was a great exponent until then. In fact, from the moment on, he radically distanced himself from the analytical mainstream, becoming one of its most destructive critics, and even abandoned his covet position as professor of philosophy at Princeton. I didn't know that. I'm reading. I didn't know that. Abandoned his position, changing it shortly after later at the invitation of E.D. Hirsch Jr. by a professor of humanities at the University of Virginia. In this, where he remained for 16 years, Rorty began to publish texts that were increasingly closer to the tradition of continental philosophy. Taking continental means Europe, and from Germany mostly, in France, but this is what is continental philosophy means. He was a friend of Jürgen Habermas. There's a book about a debate of the two of them, Rorty and Habermas, that I have a video here in the channel, super academic, but in Portuguese. If you're interested, you may take a look. Taking as a theme especially Nietzsche, Heidegger, Derrida, I forgot Derrida was of the generation, Foucault and Habermas, but also the work of novelists such as Proust, Nabokov and Orwell, thus fulfilling the functions of which he was hired, but especially in the 1990s, 1990s, he began to write about what he called cultural politics, try to articulate and make explicit his views on politics, as well as relating them to different areas of culture. During the 1990s, of course, Rorty became much more explicit and direct about his political views. He engaged in what he called cultural politics. Rorty's philosophy of education is made explicit in this phase of his work, in which, as with other areas of culture, the question of the relationship between philosophy and education is very important, is seen through the prism of its usefulness for cultural policy. The more philosophy interacts with other human activities, not just natural science but also education, art, literature, religion, and politics, the more relevant to culture policy it becomes, and therefore the more useful. I think this video is too long, 21 minutes. Even so, Richard Rorty, philosophy of education, is a problematic expression for at least three reasons. One, it is unsystematic because there is no work or a significant set of texts in which he has made his philosophical ideas explicit about education. Two, he is inaccurate because this topic always ends up mixing with his political views. He was basically a left-wing liberal, as I say, so it must interfere with his thinking. It must have interfered, of course. He's already passed away. It seems little relevant to him due to the lack of enthusiasm he manifested for the connection between philosophy on the other hand, and on one hand, and education and politics on the other, or rather, for what philosophy as a discipline or area of knowledge should do in relation to both. This is a quotation from him. A quotation from him. I am someone who has doubts about the relevance of philosophy to education, for the same reason that I have doubts about the relevance of philosophy to politics. Of course, he was, I think, being ironic. It's very important. It's very important, philosophy to education, into politics. To get around these three difficulties, it will be necessary to adopt the following strategies. First, despite the dispersion and lack of systematicity in his thematization of the issue of education, it is possible to obtain a reasonable outline of his ideas about its through a careful reading of his small instructive text, Education as Socialization and Individualization. Seems to be interesting. This title is very interesting. I haven't read that. Using experts scattered elsewhere to complete it. Second, it will be necessary not to take his unusual mix between education politics and cultural policy as a theoretical demerit, as a lack of precision and rigor, but as an intentional strategy adopted by him to remove philosophy from its academic enclosure, so that his philosophical treatment of education would have an impact on cultural policy, that is, be useful. Third, it will be considered that Rorty's doubts about the relevance of philosophy to politics and education stem only from his discredits for the way in which the philosophical tradition on the right and the left of the political spectrum dealt with such questions until recently. That is, relating truth and freedom with a supposed human essence, which would be realized as soon as education adequately, adequately, sorry, adequately, it seems like in Portuguese, adequately fulfilled its role. In both accounts of the subjects, the original rightists and the inverted leftists, there is a natural connection between truth and freedom. In both accounts of the subject, the original rightists and the inverted leftists, there is a natural connection between truth and freedom. Both accept the identification of truth and freedom with the essentially human. Yeah, freedom with essentially human. And he's saying that's the problem of leftists and rightists, that they see this essence as something that's prior to human existence. I understood that way. As myself, as existentialist, I believe that existence comes before. I could not, I can't accept that as a statement. Finally, he says, it is this metaphysical treatment of the question that intends to abandon, with his own and allegedly useful thematization, for the thinks that there is no such thing as human nature, nor is there such a thing as the alienation of one's essential humanity due to social repression in the profound sense made familiar by Rousseau and the Marxists. The achievements of the objective of this article, which is to examine the two critical lines that accuse Rortys, respectively, of being conservative and elitist, to show that they are wrong when applied to his ideas of educating citizens in a liberal democracy. As I said before, liberal democracy is something very important to Rortys and most pragmatists. In the case of the first criticism, that of conservatism, it will be shown how an education focused on the production of a reformist rhetoric, as true by Rorty, can do more for democratic values, including not only freedom but also equality. So this is a mere review. I think the videos got too long. Maybe I'll divide it in two parts just to preserve you, not tire you. But I think it was important to develop the main ideas that Rorty develops in his books, in this book specifically, mostly, but in his work in a whole. Objetivism, Relativism, and Truth, philosophical papers. There's a volume 1. I never got the volume 2 or else. I don't know if there is such a thing. Probably there is. I think there is. But I recommend that if you got interested with the ideas of Richard Rorty, you get to research and search for more information about him in your language, Portuguese or English, whatever. And I hope you enjoy. And please subscribe to both channels, help the channels to grow. And comments, give us comments about what we discussed here today in this video. Share the video and we see each other. Give the like, subscribe, like. And I see you, you see me. We see each other in the next video. Bye bye.